Hello and welcome. I am the Letterhack, and with me now is a very special guest from the 49th Parallel Podcast, co-host of the Insurgents Podcast, and I think I have this right. TRRS is the Rob Rousseau show,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's the man himself, Rob Rousseau. Rob, thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's actually the 49th Parahell podcast.
That's right.
It's a little bit of a
Yes,
play on
yes.
words. It trips
I
people up sometimes.
I
I'm
have
too clever for my own
mispronounced it.
good.
It's the Parahell. You're
Right.
right. I mispronounce that regularly just to myself. And spell check be damned. It's
Yeah.
always
It's
fixing
okay
it.
though.
Okay, so I heard you. I don't know if it was on that one or a different one, but I heard you recently remarking about how you're at that age where if you reach for something, you could hurt yourself. And I'm 49 and I'm stuck between I want to play tennis every day. I play tennis a lot, but I'm also overly cautious about like tying my shoes cuz I'll throw my back out.
Yeah.
Is that where you are, like kind of
I'm
in that weird spot?
I'm icing. You can't see it. I'm actually icing my foot right now off camera
You are.
because I walked around a little bit too much today. Yeah, I don't know. It's frustrating. I'm not that old. I'm turning 41 in a couple of months. But yeah, it's really a problem for me. I've not really taken great care of myself over the last couple of years. I think I've told this story before, but when my son's 8 years old, and when he was born, I was in the best shape of my adult life, feeling great, looking great. I was playing basketball every week and in great shape. And it's just been, you know, love the guy to more than anything in the world. But like, I have not exercised once. It's been not a lot of good nights of sleep in the last 8 years. So I would probably be doing better if I made even a small amount of effort to take care of myself, which I don't do. So that's kind of on me after a certain point.
Oh, well, the bad news is at 45, things will just start to hurt for no reason. So
Good. Yeah.
I don't know. Drink more water, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. While I get in on tonight's drawing, would you mind giving us a bit of your origin story? Talk about how and why you got into online media. And I mean, you're a podcast host for multiple outlets. How
Yeah.
and why did all that come about?
Well, I've taken a very meandering path to get to where I am. I spent most of my 20s playing in a band and trying to be successful in the music business, and did achieve small amount of success and did a lot of touring in Canada and the UK and had a record contract and everything. Ultimately, it didn't really work out, but um, I guess I would say that I've always been interested in kind of like creating things and trying to create things that appeals to people. And I guess like um once I stopped playing in a band and I kind of stopped kind of worrying about being in the music business, I had a lot of time to myself and a lot of time to go online and go on Twitter, especially in the early days of Twitter. This is around like 2010, and just really became kind of fascinated with the online discourse. And I was always very kind of like interested in politics, politically progressive, but I think over the course of those few years in the Obama administration, was became very sort of like uh, disillusioned with this certain sort of brand of liberal politics that people like Obama represented. I followed a lot of Obama's foreign policy stuff and was just really kind of grossed out by that. This his the warrantless drone assassinations and the war on terror, and um, that was really disillusioning. I think because for myself and for a lot of people around the world, was really exciting and a hopeful time when Obama was elected, and it seemed like America was maybe kind of like turning the corner after Bush, and it seemed like there was all kinds of like possibilities for progressive change. I mean, that was Obama's whole campaign. It was about change and hope, and seeing that kind of like materialize in reality, and seeing someone with so much charisma and talent, and someone who's obviously very brilliant like Obama, and seeing him, take all that political capital and that big mandate and all those abilities that he has to kind of like really triple down on this really awful sort of status quo of the U.S. government and the U.S. foreign policy establishment. It was just really radicalizing, because it's like, okay, well, maybe this is not the way. People like Obama, and so in hoping that they're going to go in and fix things. And it was just basically a natural process of being highly plugged into the news cycle and paying attention to things as it was happening over those years. And then there was, of course, the Bernie campaign and Trump and everything, and just this overall sense that not just in America, obviously, because I'm Canadian and we got our own problems and our own issues here, but in terms of our whole sort of culture, our whole civilization, just feeling like we're on the wrong track and things are rapidly becoming, more dangerous and scary. And I guess I always like, there's a lot of interesting people, political people that I followed on Twitter. I really liked listening to podcasts, and like everyone that's ever listened to a podcast, I thought it would be nice to, have my own podcast someday. And I guess just as time went on, and I kept kind of just screaming into the void on Twitter to anyone who would listen, started to develop a little bit more of a following on there. I did and said a whole bunch of crazy stuff during the Trump administration to kind of like, I don't even know why in retrospect. It was mostly just because I was angry and upset about the state of the world and the state of the future, and just said a whole bunch of stuff to make conservatives really mad, I guess. And I ended up getting a lot of appearances on conservative media as a result. I got featured on Fox News and the Daily Wire and the Blaze and InfoWars, and just like Paul Joseph Watson, and like all these people started like, holding me up as the scary liberal of the day to get mad at. And then the more that happened, the more that I started developing a little bit of a following of people who wanted to hear what I had to say. And yeah, I just thought that was the time that I might as well start trying to take this a bit more seriously, and started getting into doing the podcast. And, it's just been a matter of now, since that was around 2018 that I started doing that. And it's just been this process of just continually, week in, week out, sticking to that and continuing to put stuff out and reaching out to interesting people, having conversations about things that I'm passionate about, trying to, have a kind of analysis that's maybe different from, what's happening in our mainstream media. I know, especially for younger people, when they're looking around and they're very disillusioned about, as I once was when I was a young person, there's a lot of young people that are kind of looking around and wondering, how things are the way they are, and how things got this way. And, I guess I've tried to get better at being like a political communicator, so I can kind of help to answer some of those questions and have actual productive answers to those questions. And not, not just rely on our mainstream media or these like ghoulish conservatives to provide, answers to people that are disillusioned and have serious questions about the direction that we're headed in. And that brings me up to today.
Mainstream media, we talk about this a lot on this show, because a lot of alternatives to the mainstream will also take time to critique the mainstream. I mean, that makes sense, right? But like mainstream media and viewers of cable news, network news, always talk about like quote unquote balanced and fair reporting. What does that mean to you? And is that important to your work?
Yes, I think that's it's a cop out, and it's a way that people that work in journalism kind of disguise their own hidden ideology. And I think most fair and balanced journalists, or people that style themselves that way, will claim to themselves or others that they don't have an ideology, that they're kind of just objective observers of whatever whatever event that they're reporting on. And we have to listen to both sides. You got to listen to of any political issue, right? That's what being a mainstream journalist is. You bring on someone from the blue team to give their perspective, bring on someone from the red team to give their perspective, and probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I just think it's a really useless and actively harmful way of looking at things, I think. And that's ultimately a lot more ideological than a lot of these folks would probably admit, because it's ultimately upholding a certain status quo. And I think if you come to realize that the status quo is no good and that we need to change the status quo, then when you've devoted your life and your career to upholding that, then you're not really you're not speaking truth to power, you're not doing anything really important. You're actively making things worse. So I've always felt like I have a perspective. I'm not going to sit around and pretend that I don't. I want to approach journalism or analysis or commentary from a very specific perspective that I have, and not apologize for that, and not try and downplay it or not try and dilute it at all. And I think for people that are looking around that are upset at the state of the world and upset at the way that the media talks about things and upset at the political class, that means something to them. And I think that's people have responded really positively to me and others who are more willing to be open and honest and upfront about what our values are and what our beliefs are, and to form a sort of analysis that's based around that and not pretend that doesn't exist.
I have a couple questions about that, but first, you were talking about being on conservative news, and who knows, do they prep you on what you're going to talk about? Do they ever come at you and catch you unawares of certain topics or anything like that?
I was never brought on interviewed, but I was a subject of discussion.
I see.
When I was on Fox and Friends, they took my tweet, and they put it on the screen. It's interesting because it's election season again, so now we're getting more discourse about immigration or whatever, and it's the same thing every U.S. election cycle, right? There's a new immigrant caravan. There's a new scary gang or group that we need to be fearful of, that the Democrats are just opening the door for them. This is the narrative every couple of years in America, every election cycle. So this was close to the midterms in 2018, I guess. And again, there was all kinds of talk about this migrant caravan that's on the way, but to attack America. And MS-13, of course, was the big foreign sounding, scary gang, boogeyman kind of racial dog whistle that was being used at that time. And Donald Trump was referring to their animals, to using this kind of really gross, dehumanizing language, claiming that he's talking about violent gang members, but really painting all these immigrants with this kind of brush, suggest that this is what he's made his name doing, framing them as being gang members and rapists and drug dealers and murderers and this kind of stuff. So at the time, I fired off this tweet without really thinking, where I said that I would rather my daughter dated a member of MS-13 than a member of the Republican Party, and didn't really think much about that. I wasn't really trying to get that out in front of anyone. I was kind of just trying to do a funny sort of shit post. And I don't know how it escaped containment. I didn't have much of a following at that time, but it somehow got picked up by some awful right-wing group chat or something, but it ended up just going really crazy on conservative media. And I got thousands and thousands of comments of people just losing their minds about it. And yeah, got featured on all these different platforms, and they did a whole interview with like this like sheriff from Long Island talking about how dangerous MS-13 is on Fox News, and they showed my tweet and everything. It was extremely silly. Like, it was very ridiculous and somewhat, maybe somewhat anxious at the time too. It's like,
Yeah.
it was a little scary.
I forgot about that. It's all coming back now, because when you said
Yes,
Fox News, I was like, I don't recall seeing you on Fox News, so that's
it's
why I thought
very
I would ask
funny.
about it. But
Yeah.
that is hilarious. So, um, I mean, a lot of podcasts and live stream, or streamers are casual and do stuff off the cuff. You interact with your chat. I've been there when that's happened. Something random comes up, you have to decide whether or not you want to talk about it. Have you ever faced, like, I don't know, an ethical dilemma where you didn't want to talk about something, or you didn't think it was appropriate, like in the moment, or is anything and everything on the table?
I don't know. Like, I think everything's on the table. I like the live streaming format. I really enjoyed doing podcasting and that kind of stuff, but I really like the immediacy of doing the live streaming and having the chat there.
Is there anything you would never want to cover or talk about? Can you name one thing where you're like, I don't want to ever go there?
Well, to be honest, like, I've over the years become a lot less interested in talking about just the everyday horse race. Uh, you know, liberal versus Democrat, or liberal versus conservative in Canada. Like, just covering like liberal, Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative, horse race kind of team sports thing. I think that's one thing that I've just become a lot less interested in talking about. I still do, like, there's obviously an election coming up in the United States, which is going to be pretty ridiculous. But I think that's one thing that I've just over the years feel like it's not really that valuable to pay attention to the daily drama that's going on in the United States government or the Canadian Parliament. Have focused a lot more on sort of like geopolitics and foreign policy and empire, and this kind of like shifting geopolitical landscape, the kind of decline of the American-led empire, in which Canada is kind of a junior partner. This kind of new Cold War that's really started to ramp up in intensity over the last couple of years. I think these are the stories more that I've been more drawn to, whereas as I think maybe a few years ago, I was a lot more plugged into the daily silliness of our regular sort of democratic political institutions. This, to me, as I've grown more disillusioned with this whole process, it's just become less interesting for me to talk about or think about.
Yeah, I think that's what they want people to do. The Democrats and Republicans, our U.S. government, they want people to do the pro wrestling thing where it's like, oh, these are the main characters on our reality TV show. We have to predict what drama is going to transpire, and then when it does, we have to argue about it. But on the other hand, it's typically people, from Canada or wherever, who are paying attention and doing commentary on U.S. politics, electoral politics specifically, that have the best opinion or insight. I've noticed that a lot. I mean, just real quick, I mean, without getting into detail, who do you think is going to win in 2024? Can you predict that?
Honestly, I really would not want to try and predict it. I really publicly and confidently made some bold predictions about what was going to happen in 2020 and was really proven wrong about a lot of that. I was really emotionally invested and caught up in the whole Bernie movement, and I really believed that Bernie was going to win that primary.
Me too.
And the whole thing was very disappointing and disillusioning, and also just embarrassing for me, because I'm someone that makes a lot of public statements about this. And that's the thing. I really don't think I think I'm out of the prediction game when it comes to US politics. I'm definitely going to cover it as a journalist. I know a lot of Americans get frustrated by people in Canada or elsewhere that pay attention to what's going on in the US government. I think sometimes Americans don't understand what it's like to not be American, and they don't really understand that America is like the boss of the entire world. It's the global hegemon, right? And Canada is just kind of like a northern province of that, or a junior partner in the empire. So I think it is important to pay attention to what is going on there. I guess what I always say is that, like, when there's Canadians that only know about American politics and that's all they talk about, and they're completely disconnected from what's happening in their own country, or even worse, they have this distorted idea of Canada like we're somehow above racism, or we're above the kind of dysfunction or the polarization or anything like that, which is not at all true. That I think is not good and something that should be mocked and made fun of. But I always told myself that if I was going to talk about America and what was going on in America, that I would still try and devote as much time as I could to talking about Canada, and also dispelling myths about Canada to people that maybe have distorted or different ideas about what Canada actually is.
Do you think Canada, because it's starting already, people are saying, if Trump wins, I'm leaving. I'm going to Canada.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's a lot of people who are seriously looking for potential sanctuary, like where, the U.S. is pushing more and more anti-trans policy and bills and laws. Would Canada serve as a sanctuary to those people potentially?
I don't know. I mean, I would like to think so. I think one of the big problems that we're facing here is that I think we're on the verge of our own kind of like reactionary conservative wave here. It's one thing that I've always been really concerned with, is that in Canada is always kind of like a few years behind the US in these political trends. So once Trump was elected, I started really looking around and being like, okay, who's going to be the Canadian Trump? Like, when is this Canadian kind of reactionary conservative movement, populist movement going to take shape? And it's kind of like it's taken its time, and there's, I started to maybe doubt, like, is that what's going to happen? And Trudeau has this ability to kind of like weather a lot of different scandals, and no conservative leader has been able to square this circle. But we do, I think, have this really reactionary movement brewing. And Canada has always been a very deeply racist, deeply reactionary country, but it's all kind of like obscured by this layer of civility and politeness. But there's some really ugly stuff starting to bubble to the surface, including a lot of the same kind of anti-trans stuff that our conservative politicians are starting to embrace as a kind of like rallying point. So I guess that's my concern. We do seem to be on the verge of this wave election. After 10 years of Trudeau, I think overall people are just tired of Trudeau and want the Liberal Party to go away. And as much as Canada loves to talk about how much better we are than America because we have multi-party system, not a two-party state, we have a de facto two-party system. We've never had a government that was not the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. So we seem to be on the verge of probably a wave election behind this conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, who's just the most uncharismatic loser nerd. I don't really understand the appeal. I don't really get what these like convoy Canadian reactionary anti-vax weirdos, conspiracy weirdos see in him. He's this lifelong political operative. He's just a geek. He's not some kind of like working class whisperer at all. He's actually a landlord himself. So I don't really understand how this man is able to kind of like wrangle this movement of people that are supporting him, but it seems to be going okay so far. So I guess that's the issue for people that think Canada is going to be some kind of sanctuary. It's very, very likely that we're right on the verge of our own reactionary movement as well. So I think things are going to start to get really bad here fairly shortly.
There are some topics that are complex to me. Like I talk about this all the time on air, how I don't usually, like, I'll bring an expert on. I don't really talk about things because I haven't looked into it. I haven't researched it. It's not my area of expertise. Like, look at, but then there are people like you who make things like not just digestible but understandable. And like, for example, what's going on with Iran's involvement right now in Israel. There are a lot of potential criticisms flying around, and opinions, and frankly amateur opinions. Everyone just seems to be like quoting memes or talking points or just whatever they
Yeah.
just heard. And it's funny I'm asking you this because you had a popular tweet, but like, how do you manage to just cut through the muck? You stay so informed, but also maintaining a critical opinion like that. It's not just echoing a talking point or what everyone else. It's not a bandwagon effect. How do you do that? Is that natural?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just something that I've worked on. I mean, I've talked now for thousands of hours about this stuff. I've spent a long time. I've spent over 5 years now, every single week doing podcasting. And now since 2020, doing, 3-4 hours a day of live streaming. So I think it's just something that I've gotten better at with reps, political communication and trying to make things, understandable for people. I think there's a tendency, or there has been traditionally, for what constitutes a kind of left in Canada, the United States, to be really dominated by academia and people that might have good values or ideas, but aren't really able to like communicate these ideas in a way that's like compelling or interesting to people. So I guess that's one reason that I think I do have a sort of ability to do that, is because I don't really come from that background. I don't come from a journalistic background. Like I said, I'm an artist. I'm a musician. That's how I spent a lot of many years before getting into this kind of world of independent media. So yeah, that's a part of it. And I think just like you mentioned Iran, I think that's just something that I've grown to feel is about just like taking strong stances. And there's this tendency for people like on the left in the West to have this kind of like very idealistic sort of utopian vision for politics. And, we can never support a place like Iran because they've got these like certain characteristics in their government, they're fundamentalist, they're reactionary, or whatever you want to say. But I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that like we have this ongoing genocide for the last 6 months. Just absolute, horrible crimes and atrocities every single day that we're all witnessing. Every day is a new horror. Canada and the United States are fully supporting this. So all our talk, all our high-minded ideas about human rights and democracy and international law and all our precious values are kind of being exposed as totally fraudulent. And, a country like Iran, say what you will about the Iranian government, are materially taking steps to stand up against that and to stand up for Palestinians and to push back against Israel. And there seems to be one of the only countries that are willing to do that. So I guess it's just this really Western tendency in that moment to like hem and haw about supporting that, and to say, oh, I can't possibly be seen to support that. I can't possibly be seen to support this like regime that has this kind of like bad reputation. What's that going to mean for my career prospects? What's that going to mean for my connections or my access? And I just don't really buy into that. I'm going to take strong stances about this. And I really think we should push back on this tendency that people have to try and take this kind of middling. I think it's like you mentioned the kind of you both sides kind of form of journalism. I think there's an element of that. It's like, we should criticize Israel and we should stand against Israel, but we also can't support a country like Iran or say anything positive about that. We've got to be kind of like somewhere in the middle here, neither Tehran nor Tel Aviv. But that to me is, I think, just a kind of useless, unhelpful position. Going back through the years, when people said, throughout the Cold War, neither Washington nor Moscow, they say neither Washington nor Beijing, neither Tel Aviv nor Tehran. I think ultimately when you live in the West and you take that stance, what that means is Washington. What that means is Tel Aviv. I think it's a way to kind of like still sort of support a really awful and dangerous and violent status quo while still kind of distancing yourself from it. So I just don't really believe in trying to play both sides like this.
Let me ask you this. Do you think online media, YouTube show hosts, podcasters, although they may not have literal journalism degrees, are practicing a form of journalism? Like, is there room for the definition of journalism to expand now that there are so many? I mean, so much of cable news and network news are just biased and being fed, what to say by corporate sponsors and the state. Frankly, it's just propaganda. Do you think that alternatives to mainstream media, even if they aren't actual journalists, are practicing a form of journalism?
Yeah, I think they're practicing an even more true form of journalism because there's actually like an effort to speak truth to power. I think you might have some mainstream journalism doing some kind of interesting or valuable reporting about certain like issues like climate. But especially when it comes to foreign policy, you have this unwillingness on the part of mainstream journalists to ever really challenge the status quo of like the security state, which is largely bipartisan. And you have this willingness to promote and propagate certain narratives and this refusal to, tell the other sides of those stories. You see this, when it comes to, especially when it comes to Israel, Palestine, but you see this with pretty much any foreign policy issue. You basically have a consensus in the mainstream press that fully supports, American militarism and American foreign policy, the American foreign policy establishment, and takes certain things as basically de facto truths about enemy states and certain narratives that are promoted by the security state. So, yeah, I think people that are doing independent media on YouTube or anywhere else are doing something really important because they're refusing to buy into that dynamic. And, one of my most strongly held political beliefs is to be against the empire and to be against American imperialism and to try and talk about these certain narratives in a way that's not talked about in our media. I think this is one of the reasons that Trump became as popular as he did, because like people understand intrinsically that the media is corrupt, that there is a big problem with the media. And obviously when Trump makes these criticisms, I don't think he's doing that for altruistic reasons. It's entirely self-serving. But I think it speaks to people because people have this, people understand this to a certain extent. They know the media lies to you. They know the media is in the pockets of very powerful people. And, if there's not people on the left that are willing to articulate that, it's only going to be the Trumps of the world that are able to make this criticism and grow their own popularity and use that to demagogue themselves to lead people down this really bad direction. So I think it's really important and vital that people are out there in these independent spaces while they still exist, promoting stories and narratives that aren't talked about in our media, especially when it comes to issues of empire and issues of foreign policy.
Yeah, I typically ask my guest what they're most critical of with the mainstream media. But I think what I want to know is, what are the key qualities you look for in a journalist in terms of how you set your own standards, how you conduct yourself on your show?
Yeah. Well, again, I like people that are going to talk about this from a certain perspective, unapologetically, like I've spoken to like Marxist academics and historians like Vijay Prashad. I've had a number of really good conversations with him. And, you know, I would consider him a journalist as well, but I don't think like he would really be considered that by people in our mainstream media. But I want to talk to people that have the same perspective as me, about especially when it comes to these issues of foreign policy. And, you know, I want to have conversations with people from that angle. And I don't want to pretend for the sake of sort of like appearing unbiased that don't have these inclinations. You know, there's enough people in our media that are telling these kinds of stories. So when I want to speak to journalists, I want to talk to people that have very passionate and specific viewpoints that they're approaching their journalism from. And it's just a major red flag for me, anyone that calls themselves a journalist that tries to pretend that they're not ideological or they're somehow above politics. Because ultimately, I think, you know, these people, like I said, are highly ideological and are upholding a really specific and dangerous status quo of, you know, capitalism, imperialism, and will demonize anyone that's outside of that, you know, especially from the left, and are often going to be a lot more favorable to people coming from the right. Because even if they might find them distasteful, they still agree a lot when it comes to certain issues of the way that the economy should function or the way our society should function. So that's something that I'm just not really interested in. When I seek out people that I want to talk to people that have a very specific perspective that they're not going to apologize for or try to obscure in any way.
Well, what's one thing that you would want your audience to take away above all else? Can you narrow that down? And like, are you trying to influence the audience, or not try to influence them, but do you want your audience to be influenced in some way? Or are you just putting information out there for them to do what they will with?
Well, sometimes there's a bit of that. I think, like, you know, depending on what show we're talking about, I think there's like on the Insurgents podcast, for example, I think sometimes we've had some people on there that I might disagree with about certain things, but what my approach to any time that I'm talking to someone that I maybe don't fully agree with is just to ask the questions that I think that the listeners would want to hear and allow them to answer. I'm not really interested in debating people or having these kind of arguments, or I don't really think that's useful, but I'll ask the questions that I want to hear their answers to. I'll let them answer, and then I'll just leave it up to the audience to decide whether it's an adequate or acceptable answer, whether it's not enough. You know,
do you
that's
like
a big part of it.
co-hosting? Do you,
Yeah.
or what, you know, because I always say, give me options. I'm bound to have a preference. Would you rather co-host or go solo?
I like doing both. I like doing my show that I do completely myself. You know, I like having the ability to really create something, you know, from the look and feel of it and the music and booking all the guests and all the segments. And I like having something that's really just driven by myself and my own personality. But I've also really enjoyed co-hosting the show with Jordan as well. Like, we're kind of come from two different but somehow similar backgrounds as well. He's kind of from the Midwest and I'm from Eastern Ontario, which is like the Midwest of Canada. And we might have different viewpoints on things, and we've come from sort of different contexts and experiences, but I think we have a lot of similar values, and I think it creates a kind of interesting dynamic. We had, like, when we started doing that show, I think we found we had kind of a chemistry. We do a lot of like funny, humorous segments and that kind of stuff. So I really enjoy both. And if you want me to answer your question from earlier too about what you wanted me to distill whatever message down to something like simple, I guess.
Can you do that?
I think so. And really that's like talking about, you know, the West and our society and our culture and the rules-based order. And I think it's been a really eye-opening experience for me, understanding the reality of the West and the way that the myths that we tell ourselves about what our values are, our values of human rights and democracy and freedom of the press. And I think the more you look into the history of imperialism And when you see what our values actually are, you realize that we've been kind of sold a lie about our society. Canada in particular as well, because like I said, Canada styles itself as this kind of like post-racial, progressive place where everyone's kind to one another. It couldn't be farther from the truth. And in fact, Canada's entire culture, such as it exists, is kind of like fictional. It was kind of created in like ad campaigns for like beer brands and coffee chains. So I think this is what I tried to distill to people, that when you look at these geopolitical conflicts, we're the baddies. That's what the West is. That's what the rules-based order is. It's basically like a global criminal cartel, and it's led by the United States, and Canada and the UK and Germany and Australia are the kind of junior partners, and France and other Western countries. But when you approach these like geopolitical conflicts, I think that's the thing that I try to keep clearer in my mind and what I try to communicate to people. Like there's no like, oh, both sides, this taking this kind of like, middling approach to these conflicts, I think is really kind of harmful. So that's what I try to distill. I mean, something that has stuck with me is this quote from Kwame Ture, someone whose work I've really enjoyed learning about over the last couple of years, where it's something to the effect of, he says, if I'm the Imam of Mecca and American imperialism is fighting the devil, I'm on the side of the devil. Right. And that is something that has really stuck with me and has I think provided me with a lot of clarity when it comes to talking about certain geopolitical issues that are sometimes really controversial and sometimes hard to talk about. But it's been sort of like my certain a way for me to kind of like center myself in those moments and to understand, the stakes and understand who's on what side.
Do you get pushback, whether constructive criticism or like random negative comments? Do you get pushback on some of these takes, or your point of view?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you deal with that?
Honestly, I just don't look at it.
Okay.
When I do live streaming, it's mostly a very positive thing. It's sometimes people come in to yell at me or say whatever, but it's fairly rare. On Twitter is a whole other thing. Like sometimes tweets will just escape containment and get in front of audiences of people that get really upset about the content of the message, especially over the last 6 months. That's happened a lot, as I've talked a lot about Palestine and said a lot of things that people aren't very happy about. But I just find it's you really gain nothing from engaging with that. I think I just told myself after a certain point that, like, if I'm going to have this public platform, there's going to be people that are not going to be happy about the stuff that I have to say. And as someone who does kind of desperately want to be liked by everyone, it's hard to let go of that. But it's just something I told myself. You just have to, you have to let go of this idea that you can appeal to everyone, or that you can talk about things in a certain way where no one's ever going to get upset or no one's ever going to get mad at you. And in fact, if certain people get mad about the things you're saying, that's actually a sign that you're usually on the right path. And if you're trying to appeal to everyone, you're not really accomplishing anything as a journalist. But I don't look at it. I don't look at the quote tweets, or I don't really look at the replies from people that don't follow me. I really try to avoid any of that stuff. I guess I just had this attitude that, like, if a tweet goes in front of these audiences and starts getting all kinds of people mad and saying all kinds of stuff, I mute it. I walk away. People can do their replies, or they can scream into the void, or do discourse about whatever. But I just kind of say, that's you can enjoy that. I'm not going to pay attention to it. I'm not going to look at it. It's really mentally harmful to start really obsessively looking at the negative comments that people say about you. I really wouldn't recommend it. So that's just something that I avoid. When I put something out there and I see people are getting mad about it, I just walk away and I just move on with my life.
I made my entire chat moderators.
That's interesting.
Everyone it's a little social experiment. It's like everyone's a moderator, a standard moderator. Some people are managing moderators, so they can mod mods.
Okay.
And I'm just like, okay, well, if YouTube allows that, let's try it. And so when trolls come in, like there was somebody who came in and made a comment and I didn't catch like a previous comment that was identifying them as a troll, and they got obliterated. They didn't
Yeah.
stand a chance. Yeah, and it was just, I always knew that could happen, but it was such a pleasure to see.
He
It was like,
deputized
yeah,
everybody.
like those guys, whoever that was, made a huge mistake coming in. I
Yeah.
did a fake right wing show for April Fools, and it was me, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, but I was doing like a routine where I was a right wing host, and we got in the algorithm.
Oh
Right,
wow.
other right wing YouTube shows were popping up in the chat, and I was like, "This is dangerous." I'm glad I did deputize everyone.
Yeah.
So look, how do you unplug? Because it's a front lines world. Whether you got a podcast or you're just watching podcasts, we're always being inundated with negativity and horrible things going on in the world. How do you unplug? Do you still play music?
Yeah, I do. I actually took some time to record a bunch of music this year for the first time in a couple of years.
Cool.
I love pop music and writing songs and doing and recording. Just as more of a hobby. It used to be really my whole life, but now I've been enjoying just doing that kind of just for me, like not really making much effort to put it out there for anyone or to do it. It's just been a purely creative exercise for me that I've enjoyed a lot. I spend a lot of time with my son, and it's easy to, I think, unplug from that if you're just kind of like, spending time with the people that you love and focusing on that, focusing on being a good dad. Yeah, it's that kind of stuff. It's really it can be so harmful to be so immersed in this stuff all the time, and it really is important to have outlets like that, whether it's writing or music or spending time with people that you care about. They really my son's really important to me because it's like I'm concerned about the future that he's going to grow up in. I think that was one of the main things for me after having a kid that really made me a lot more passionate about politics than even I was previously. So he takes up a lot of my time and a lot of my energy, just spending time with him.
That's great. I mean, as long as you're not gonna, pull a muscle or something while helping him tie his shoes, or I don't know how old he is,
Yeah.
but just be careful.
Yeah.
Well, when we don't talk about this kind of stuff, we're on this show, we talk about art and comic books. And I'm curious, do you ever read comics? Have you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
No,
really?
I'm not a huge, massive comic fan. I've got a little bit of a collection.
What do you read? What
I've
do
got
you?
I've got some of the old classics there. I mean, I've got the whole Preacher series.
Oh, nice.
I do really like that. I've got a couple things. I've got a
Okay,
couple
cool.
things.
See, I like to recommend comics to my guests because I kind of want to demonstrate that it's more than just superheroes. Like Preacher, that's like a perfect example. But also, like when Senator Nina Turner was on, I recommended this comic called Our Numbers Be Unlimited about unions, the history of unions. And it was created by a guy who is currently working at an Amazon warehouse. So he gave his personal story and perspective too. And she thought for sure I was going to be recommending Superman and Batman. And we even did talk about that a little bit. She brought it up, which was kind of cool. But I have one for you that is, I don't know. Sometimes I try and play like craft cocktail maker where I size somebody up and give them the perfect drink or the perfect
Yeah.
comic recommendation. I don't know if I'm really achieving that here, but I've been wanting to recommend this comic for a while and I thought maybe you would dig it. It's called Survival Street.
Survival Street.
Yeah, here's the premise. It takes place in an alternate version of the United States where corporations have completely taken over the country and removed all governmental regulations. The result is a number of billionaires and businessmen running the country as they see fit, dividing it up into factions and letting crime and poverty run rampant. In the fallout, all government-funded programs were completely cut, including public broadcasting, forcing all the edutainers out onto the streets. So imagine Muppets, right?
Yeah.
They're real. Okay, so the Muppet educators end up on the streets, but they didn't stop teaching. They just changed the curriculum. Instead of teaching children the alphabet or how to treat others with kindness, a group of them come together and become a team of mercenary vigilantes akin to the A-Team, fighting
Very
far
cool.
and educating. Fighting for and educating children who were left to rot in the all-encompassing war zone within the new corporate-run system of New Best America. That's what they're calling it, New Best America. So Muppets take up arms and lead the revolution.
Amazing.
Yeah, in
Yeah, it seems
Survival
great.
Street. Yeah, it looks good too. It's a great story and it's great art. So check that out. If you do check it out, let me know what you think. I'd be interested to hear.
I will. I actually drew a comic recently too because
Oh, you did?
I'm a terrible artist. I'm not a good artist at
No
all.
such thing. No such
I've
thing.
never like I love I like it, but I've never practiced drawing. I never really learned how to do it. But my son really he loves comics and he loves stories and art and drawing, and sometimes he just like puts a piece of paper in front of me. He's like, "You draw a comic book," and he kind of puts me on the spot, and I have to kind of like make something up on the spot. So I've done a couple funny things for him, including this comic called Metal Dude, who's like this kind of like he's this geeky high school student. Then when he touches a magical guitar, it gives him these powers, and he grows long hair, and he has a cool jacket, and his guitar shoots electricity, and he defeats bullies and bad guys and stuff like that.
You know what? That's reminding me of the comic I recommended to Jordan when he was on. It's called Murder Falcon, and it's about how do I describe it without ruining it? It's like there are monsters from a parallel universe invading our universe, and the only thing that can stop them is metal.
Oh, nice.
And so this guy,
Jordan must have liked that.
Yeah, this guy's got to get the band back together.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a good one too. Murder Falcon by Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer. That's a good one. Okay, well, look, I've got links to all your stuff in the description of this video. I encourage everyone to check out everything that Rob is doing. But Rob, is there anything that you want to plug specifically before we wrap?
You can tune into my show TRRS every single day, 12 o'clock Eastern to around 4 p.m. Twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau. I also do the Insurgents Podcast with Jordan. We were talking about insurgentspod.com. You said the links are all going to be there, so people can check it out. But I'm always talking about this stuff and podcasting and streaming and tweeting. You can't get rid of me. So there's numerous places where you can find the work that I'm doing and check it out.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And open invite to come on anytime you want. If you're, I feel like you should be writing a book. I don't know why. I feel like
I've thought about it.
Yeah, well, if you ever do and you want to promote it, just come right here and you can do that.
All right, I will.
I don't know why, because I was looking, I was like, has he written a book? Why do I feel like this guy's an author?
Yeah.
He's just author waiting to happen. But
I mean, I've always wanted to be, but I think that's what I think if someone ever agreed to like get me to write a book, I would find I'd be so miserable. I'd be like, I can't believe I agreed to do this. I would like, I love writing, but I hate it at the same time. I find it so torturous, the whole experience. That's why I like live streaming and podcasting, because I don't have to sit down and agonize over every word. I just turn on a microphone and just whatever happens, and then you just turn it off and then you're finished. I like it, but maybe one day.
Well, as long as you keep podcasting, people will keep watching. Yeah. I guarantee it. But thanks again for being here. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.